The dusty auction yard outside Barstow buzzed with tension as leather-clad bikers circled the holding pen. Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez needed a horse, fast. His cover as a federal agent embedded in the Hells Angels was blown, and he had 24 hours before the chapter president discovered his true identity. The auction handler pointed to a scarred Mustang in the corner, rejected by every other bidder. "That one's got issues," the man warned. "Won't let nobody ride him." Tank paid cash and loaded the horse into his trailer, not knowing he'd just purchased Thunder, a Mustang trained by Navy SEALs for covert mountain operations. As Tank's Harley roared to life leading the horse trailer toward the desert, he had no idea this broken animal was about to become his greatest ally in the most dangerous mission of his life. The Hells Angels thought they were hunting one man, but they were about to face a force of nature they never expected. But what happens when a trained killer meets a wild spirit that refuses to be tamed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun hung low over the Mojave as Tank guided his rig down a forgotten mining road, dust clouds marking his passage like smoke signals. Every few minutes he checked his mirrors, not for cops, but for the telltale glint of chrome and the rumble of V-twins that would mean his former brothers had found his trail. The irony wasn't lost on him that after 18 months of living as one of them, breathing their code, earning their trust with bloodied knuckles and unwavering loyalty, it all came down to a single photograph left carelessly visible on his burner phone. Agent Marcus Rodriguez of the ATF had spent years building the Tank persona, a drifter with a rap sheet long enough to impress and skills violent enough to earn respect. He'd ridden with the Devil's Disciples chapter through drug runs, territorial wars, and enough felonies to fill a federal courthouse, all to get close to Vincent Viper Morrison, the chapter president who'd turned their brotherhood into a pipeline for military-grade weapons flowing to cartels and domestic terrorists. But now his extraction point was compromised. His backup 24 hours out, and Viper's paranoia had reached a fever pitch. The chapter president had ordered a lockdown, nobody in or out until they found the rat. Tank had exactly one advantage. Viper's obsession with appearing legitimate had led him to purchase a ranch in the San Bernardino Mountains, complete with horses for his weekend cowboy fantasies. When Tank volunteered to source the livestock, claiming expertise from a fictional childhood in Montana, Viper had given him a 12-hour window. The trailer shuddered over a pothole, and an explosive kick from inside reminded Tank he wasn't alone. He'd grabbed the first horse available, not bothering to inspect his purchase beyond ensuring it had 4 legs and a pulse. Desperate men make desperate choices, and Tank was running on empty in every sense that mattered. His phone buzzed, a text from Viper, "Where's my horse, brother?" Tank typed back, "Loading supplies. Be there by midnight." 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, "Don't disappoint me, Tank. Family takes care of family, but traitors get buried." The message sent ice through Tank's veins. Viper knew something, or suspected enough to make tonight deadly. The ranch would be a trap, probably a dozen patch holders waiting to greet him with bullets instead of brotherhood. Tank needed an exit strategy that didn't involve a body bag. He pulled off the main road onto a fire trail that snaked toward a cluster of abandoned mining shacks. The structures dated back to the 1940s, weathered by decades of desert winds but still standing, perfect cover to reassess his options. As he killed the engine, silence rushed in like a held breath. No cell towers out here, no GPS tracking, just endless miles of sand, sage, and stone. Tank climbed from the cab and approached the trailer, curiosity finally overriding urgency. What kind of horse had the auction yard so spooked? He'd seen handlers work with temperamental thoroughbreds and stubborn quarter horses, but the warning in that man's eyes suggested something different. The trailer's interior lay in shadow, but Tank could make out the silhouette of his purchase. The Mustang stood perfectly still, ears forward, watching him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Scars crisscrossed the animal's dark coat, not random marks from barbed wire or rough handling, but precise lines that spoke of violent encounters survived through skill and determination. Easy there, Tank murmured, reaching slowly for the lead rope. We're both running from something tonight. The Mustang's nostrils flared, testing Tank's scent, reading intentions with predatory awareness. For a moment, man and beast regarded each other across species lines, two warriors recognizing kindred damage in the other's eyes. Neither Tank nor the horse could predict that their desperate alliance would transform a simple survival mission into something that would shake the Hell's Angels to their foundation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the makeshift paddock as Jake approached the horse with a cup of black coffee steaming in his hands. 3 days had passed since he'd brought the animal home, and each morning brought the same ritual: cautious observation from a respectful distance. The horse stood at the far end of the enclosure, muscles taut beneath a coat that shimmered like burnished copper in the early light. Every line of his body spoke of barely contained power, from the arch of his neck to the way his hooves seemed to barely touch the ground. Jake had seen plenty of animals in his 42 years, but nothing quite like this one. "Easy there, Red," Jake murmured, using the name that had somehow stuck since day one. The horse's ears flicked forward at the sound, dark eyes tracking Jake's every movement. There was intelligence there, sharp and calculating, like the animal was taking his measure. Jake's phone buzzed against his chest. Tommy Hendrick's name flashed on the screen, and Jake's jaw tightened as he answered. "Church tonight." Tommy's gravelly voice cut through the morning stillness without preamble. 8 sharp, don't be late. "I'll be there." "Good. And Jake? Word's getting around about your little horse purchase. Some of the boys think you're going soft." The line went dead before Jake could respond. He stared at the phone, feeling the familiar knot of tension form between his shoulder blades. In the Angel's perception was everything, and any sign of weakness could be fatal. He'd learned that lesson the hard way over his 15 years wearing the patch. Red snorted softly, as if sensing Jake's mood shift. The horse had moved closer during the phone call, now standing just 10 feet away. His nostrils flared, testing Jake's scent on the morning breeze. "You picking up on that too, boy?" Jake asked quietly. "Yeah, I got problems. Question is, what am I supposed to do with you?" The honest answer was that Jake had acted on impulse at the auction, something he rarely allowed himself to do. But when he'd seen Red standing in that sorry excuse for a pen, ribs showing and spirit seemingly broken, something had stirred in Jake's chest. Maybe it was recognition, one caged animal seeing another. He'd grown up on his grandfather's ranch in Montana before the old man died, and left him with nothing but debt and bitter memories. The skills were still there, buried under years of leather and chrome, but Jake hadn't touched a horse in over 2 decades. Not since he'd traded wide-open spaces for the brotherhood of the road. Now, watching Red test the air between them, Jake felt those old instincts stirring back to life. He set his coffee on a fence post and pulled an apple from his jacket pocket. Red's ears perked up immediately, head lifting with sudden interest. Jake held the fruit at arm's length, palm flat, the way his grandfather had taught him all those years ago. "Come on, then," he said softly. "Let's see what you're really made of." Red took a tentative step forward, then another. His movements were fluid despite his obvious caution, each hoof placed with deliberate precision. Jake remained perfectly still, barely breathing as the horse closed the distance between them. When Red's muzzle finally touched Jake's palm, the contact sent an unexpected jolt through both man and animal. The horse's lips were velvet soft as they claimed the apple, but Jake barely noticed. He was transfixed by Red's eyes, wild and proud, but also haunted, like looking into a mirror. The moment stretched between them, something unspoken passing in the space of a heartbeat. Then Red stepped back, chewing thoughtfully, head tilted as if reassessing this strange human who'd brought him home. Jake's phone buzzed again, a text from Mickey Torino, one of Tommy's lieutenants. "Heard about the horse. You training for the rodeo now, old man?" Jake deleted the message without responding, but the damage was done. Word was spreading through the chapter, and that meant questions he wasn't ready to answer. In Tommy's world, anything that didn't serve the club was viewed with suspicion, and lately Tommy's suspicions had been running toward the paranoid. Jake had been hearing rumors for months, whispers about missing money, unexplained violence, connections that didn't make sense, the kind of rumors that got people hurt if they dug too deep. But Jake had been digging anyway, quietly, carefully, because 15 years of loyalty meant something, and he needed to know if Tommy was destroying everything they'd built. Red moved closer again, this time without prompting, the horse's massive head lowered until Jake could feel warm breath against his shoulder. It was a gesture of trust that Jake hadn't earned yet, but somehow Red was offering it anyway. "All right, boy," Jake whispered, his hand finding the horse's neck. "Maybe we both got something to prove." In the distance, the rumble of motorcycle engines drifted across the desert, a reminder that his two worlds were about to collide in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The morning sun cast long shadows across the makeshift corral as Jake approached the horse with a bucket of oats and a healthy dose of skepticism. The stallion stood at the far end of the enclosure, muscles coiled beneath his copper coat, watching Jake's every movement with eyes that seemed to hold intelligence far beyond what any broken-down nag should possess. "Easy there, Red," Jake murmured, using the name that had stuck after yesterday's dramatic arrival. The horse's ears twitched forward at the sound of his voice, but he maintained his distance. Jake had spent half the night researching horse care on his phone, feeling foolish but determined not to let his $1,500 turn into glue factory fodder. The videos made it look simple enough. Food, water, patience. What they didn't mention was the electric tension that seemed to radiate from this particular animal, or the way Red's gaze followed him like a predator sizing up potential prey. Setting the bucket down near the fence, Jake backed away slowly. "Your call, partner." Red approached with cautious steps, each hoof placement deliberate and silent despite his size. As he lowered his head to the oats, Jake noticed the scars crisscrossing his legs and flanks, not the random marks of neglect, but deliberate patterns that spoke of violence and survival. "What the hell did they do to you?" Jake whispered. The horse's head snapped up, oats still clinging to his muzzle, and for a moment their eyes met. Jake felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he couldn't name. This wasn't just an animal. This was a survivor, scarred and wary, but unbroken. A rumbling sound growing louder broke the spell. 3 Harleys were approaching down the dirt road, led by Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, Viper's right-hand man and the chapter's sergeant-at-arms. Jake's jaw tightened as the bikes pulled up in a cloud of dust and engine noise. Tank killed his engine and dismounted, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow light. Behind him, 2 prospects, Jimmy and Crow, flanked him like loyal attack dogs. "Well, well," Tank's voice carried the gravelly tone of a lifetime smoker. "Heard you bought yourself a pet, Steele." Jake kept his expression neutral. "News travels fast. Viper's got questions about where you came up with 1,500 cash." Tank's small eyes glittered with malice. "Funny thing about club finances, they're supposed to flow upward if you catch my meaning. My money, my business." Jake stepped away from the fence, positioning himself between the 3 men and Red. Behind him, he could hear the horse moving, hooves shifting nervously. Tank's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. "Everything's club business, brother, especially when our enforcer starts making unauthorized purchases." He gestured toward Red. "What's the plan here? Gonna ride off into the sunset like some cowboy movie? Maybe I just wanted something that doesn't leak oil on my floor." The prospect snickered, but Tank's expression darkened. "Careful, Steele. That attitude could get you labeled as ungrateful, and we both know how Viper deals with ungrateful members." A sudden snort from behind made all 3 visitors take a step back. Red had moved to the fence, his head high and ears pinned back in clear aggression. The stallion's presence seemed to fill the space between them, and Jake felt an unexpected surge of confidence. "Horse doesn't seem to like you much," Jake observed. Tank's hand moved instinctively toward the .38 tucked in his waistband. Animals got no manners. Maybe it needs to be put down before it hurts someone. Touch him and find out what happens. The words came out harder than Jake intended, but he didn't back down. Something about Red's defiant stance had awakened a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. The tension stretched taut as a wire until Tank finally stepped back with a forced chuckle. "Relax, horse whisperer. Just making conversation." He remounted his Harley and kicked it to life. "But Jake, Viper wants to see you tonight. Church meeting. Don't be late." The three bikes roared away, leaving dust and implied threats hanging in the air. Jake turned to find Red standing close to the fence, close enough to touch. The horse's nostrils flared as he processed the sense of fear, anger, and something else. Determination. "So you don't like them either," Jake said quietly, extending his hand palm up. After a long moment, Red stretched his neck forward and brushed Jake's fingers with his muzzle, the contact electric and surprisingly gentle. For the first time in months, Jake smiled without effort. Whatever games Viper and Tank were playing, whatever corruption was eating away at the chapter he'd once been proud to call family, he wasn't facing it alone anymore. Red snorted softly and returned to his oats, but stayed close to the fence, close to Jake. In the growing heat of the Arizona morning, an unlikely alliance was taking shape, one that would soon prove more dangerous to the devil's disciples than either man or beast could imagine. The Mustang's hooves thundered against the packed earth as Jake guided him through the canyon trails behind his property. 3 weeks had passed since he'd brought Storm home, and the transformation in both horse and rider was undeniable. What had started as stubborn defiance from the stallion had evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared wildness. Jake pulled up near the ridge overlooking the valley, his hands steady on the reins he barely needed anymore. Storm snorted, his breath visible in the crisp morning air, ears swiveling at every sound. The horse had regained weight, his coat now gleaming black with health. But it was his spirit that truly impressed Jake. This wasn't just any Mustang, this was a warrior. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" Jake murmured, patting Storm's neck. "Something's coming." As if summoned by his words, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the canyon. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd been expecting this visit, dreading it, but knowing it was inevitable. Tommy the Snake Morrison didn't tolerate his enforcers going off the grid for long. Jake urged Storm down the trail toward his cabin, but instead of heading to the barn, he guided the horse to a concealed spot behind a cluster of boulders. From here, they could observe the house while remaining hidden. 3 bikes roared into his driveway, kicking up dust clouds. Tommy dismounted first, his massive frame intimidating even at a distance. Behind him came Razor and Diesel, 2 of the chapter's most vicious members. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the .45, tucked beneath his leather jacket. "Jake!" Tommy's voice boomed across the property. "Get your ass out here, we need to talk." Storm tensed beneath him, sensing the threat. Jake felt the horse's muscles coil like springs, ready to explode into action. It was then he noticed something extraordinary. Storm wasn't afraid. He was angry. The stallion's dark eyes fixed on the men below with an intelligence that sent chills down Jake's spine. "Easy," Jake whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was calming the horse or himself. Tommy kicked at Jake's front door, then motioned for his men to check around back. "I know you're here, brother. Your truck's still warm." Jake watched Razor disappear around the corner of the cabin while Diesel started poking through his motorcycle, parked under a lean-to. Tommy stood in the center of the yard, his predatory gaze scanning the surrounding hills. "You been holding out on us, Jake," Tommy called out. "Word is you got something that belongs to the chapter. Something valuable you ain't shared with your brothers." Storm's ears flattened against his skull, and Jake felt the horse's hatred radiating like heat. It was impossible, but Jake could swear the Mustang understood every word and despised what he heard. Diesel's voice carried from the lean-to. "Tommy, his bike's cold. He ain't been riding it today." "Then how'd he get around?" Tommy muttered, his eyes still searching. That's when Razor appeared from behind the cabin, pointing toward the barn. "Fresh horse tracks heading up into the rocks." Jake's blood ran cold. These weren't random bikers. They were hunters, and they'd found his trail. Tommy's grin was visible even from this distance as he strode toward the barn. "Well, well," Tommy laughed. "Jake's playing cowboy now. Found himself a pony." Storm's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The stallion reared slightly, a low rumble emanating from his chest that Jake had never heard before. It wasn't fear or anger, it was recognition. This horse knew Tommy Morrison, or at least knew what he represented. Jake's mind raced back to old Pete's words about Storm's history, about being caught and broken repeatedly. Had Tommy's operation been involved? The chapter had fingers in every dirty deal from here to Nevada. Horse theft and illegal rodeos wouldn't be beneath them. "Search every inch of that barn," Tommy ordered. "If there's a horse, there's our boy." Storm began backing away from the boulder, moving with supernatural quiet for such a large animal. Jake didn't fight it. He trusted the horse's instincts more than his own right now. They retreated deeper into the rocks as the bikers spread out below. "This ain't over, Jake," Tommy's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "You got 24 hours to show your face at the clubhouse. Don't make me come looking again." The engines roared to life, and eventually the sound faded into the distance. Jake waited another 10 minutes before emerging from their hiding spot, his heart still hammering. Storm stood perfectly still as Jake dismounted, then turned to face him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. In that moment, Jake understood that everything had changed. This wasn't just about his problems with the chapter anymore. Storm had his own score to settle. "Looks like we both got reasons to bring Tommy down," Jake said softly. The Mustang's answering snort sounded almost like agreement. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Jake approached the corral with a halter in his hands. Thunder stood at the far end, muscles coiled like springs beneath his midnight coat. 3 days had passed since their first encounter, and Jake's ribs still ached from where he'd hit the fence. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. "Just you and me today." Thunder's ears flicked forward, amber eyes tracking Jake's every movement. The stallion had been watching him work around the property, always alert, always calculating. Jake had noticed the intelligence behind those eyes, something deeper than typical horse awareness. He took a slow step forward, halter loose in his grip. "I know you've been hurt. Hell, we both have scars." Jake's voice carried the rough edge of too many cigarettes and sleepless nights. "But I'm not him. I'm not whoever broke your trust." Thunder snorted, pawing the ground with a front hoof that could easily cave in a man's skull, but he didn't bolt. That was progress. Jake's phone buzzed against his chest. He ignored it, maintaining eye contact with the Mustang. Trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered by distraction. The phone fell silent, then immediately started buzzing again. "Shit," Jake muttered, finally glancing at the screen. Razor's name flashed insistently. "What?" Jake answered, not bothering to hide his irritation. "Church tonight, brother. 8 sharp. President's got something big planned." Razor's voice carried an undercurrent of excitement that made Jake's stomach turn. "I'll be there. Better be. Word is he's looking to expand operations. Means more money for everyone who's proven their loyalty." Jake ended the call without responding and shoved the phone back into his pocket. Thunder had retreated several steps during the conversation, as if sensing the darkness that crept into Jake's demeanor whenever club business intruded. "Yeah, I know," Jake said to the horse. "They're poison. Every last one of them." But as he spoke the words aloud, Jake realized something had shifted inside him over the past few days. The constant anger that had driven him for years felt different now, focused rather than wild, purposeful instead of self-destructive. Working with Thunder, trying to earn the Mustang's trust, had given him something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He spent the next hour simply existing in the same space as the horse, moving slowly around the corral, talking in low tones about nothing important. Thunder gradually relaxed, eventually approaching close enough that Jake could smell the earthy scent of his coat. When Jake finally left for town that evening, Thunder watched him go from the fence line, a silent sentinel against the darkening sky. The clubhouse reeked of stale beer and cigarette smoke. Jake arrived precisely at 8, his leather vest bearing the patches that had once filled him with pride, but now felt like chains. The other members were already gathered around the scarred wooden table that served as their council chamber. Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. His massive frame filled the president's chair, and his cold eyes swept the room with predatory satisfaction. To his right sat Tommy "Snake" Morrison, the chapter's secretary and Tank's most loyal enforcer. The man's reptilian smile never reached his eyes. "Brothers," Tank began, his voice commanding immediate attention. "Tonight we discuss expansion. The meth trade has been good to us, but there's more money to be made." Jake kept his expression neutral while his stomach clenched. He'd known this day would come, when Tank would push deeper into territory that would destroy more lives, claim more victims. "The Riverside territory is ripe for takeover," Snake added, spreading a crude map across the table. "Weak leadership, scattered competition. We move in hard and fast, establish our supply lines before anyone can react." Tank's gaze settled on Jake. "Bull, you've been quiet lately, spending too much time at that ranch of yours. Hope you're not going soft on us." The room fell silent. Every man present understood the threat underlying those words. In Tank's organization, loyalty was absolute, and questioning that loyalty carried severe consequences. "Just been laying low," Jake replied evenly. "Waiting for the right opportunity to prove myself." Tank's smile was cold as winter steel. "Good. Because I've got a special assignment for you. Consider it a test of your commitment to this family." Jake nodded, knowing that refusing wasn't an option. "Whatever you need. There's a witness. Some punk kid who saw too much during our last collection run. He's been talking to people, asking questions. We can't let that continue." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake felt the familiar weight of violence settling on his shoulders, but this time it felt different, heavier, more final. "Where do I find him?" Tank slid a photograph across the table. A young face stared back at Jake, maybe 19 years old, with eyes that still held hope for the future. "Make it clean," Tank said, "and make it permanent." The pre-dawn air cut through Jake's leather jacket as he stood in the paddock, watching Thunder move through the shadows. 3 weeks had passed since he'd brought the Mustang home, and something had fundamentally shifted between them. The horse no longer shied away when Jake approached. Instead, Thunder would lift his head, ears forward, acknowledging him with what could almost pass for trust. Jake had been coming out here every morning before the clubhouse stirred to life, using these quiet hours to work with Thunder away from prying eyes. Word had already spread through the chapter about his pet project, and he could feel the mockery brewing. Bikers didn't keep horses. They kept grudges, secrets, and scores to settle. "Easy, boy." Jake's voice carried softly across the morning mist as he approached with a lead rope. Thunder snorted but didn't retreat. Progress. The Mustang's wild spirit hadn't broken. Jake wouldn't want it to, but something like partnership was taking root. The sound of motorcycles roaring to life in the distance reminded Jake why he was really here. Last night's church meeting had gone sideways fast. Viper had announced another protection run to the Riverside Marina, the third one this month. The other members bought his story about keeping rival clubs away from their territory, but Jake knew better. He'd done enough enforcement to recognize a shakedown operation when he heard one. The marina owner, Carlos Mendoza, was a decent man trying to run a legitimate business. Jake had seen the fear in Carlos's eyes during the last visit, watched him count out protection money with shaking hands, while Viper smiled that cold smile that never reached his eyes. It was exactly the kind of corruption that had been eating away at the club's honor for months. Thunder nudged Jake's shoulder, pulling him back to the present. The horse's dark eyes seemed to read his mood, sensing the tension that had become Jake's constant companion. Strange how an animal could offer more understanding than the brotherhood he'd bled for. "You know what loyalty means, don't you?" Jake murmured, running his hand along Thunder's neck. The Mustang's coat was finally starting to shine with proper care, revealing the true black beneath months of neglect. Loyalty to something real, not to whoever's got the biggest cut. Footsteps crunched across the gravel behind him. Jake turned to see Diesel approaching, coffee cups steaming in the cool air. His old friend looked tired, worn down by the same conflicts that kept Jake awake at night. "Figured I'd find you out here." Diesel stopped at the fence, nodding toward Thunder. "He's looking better. Still think you're crazy for taking him on. Crazy seems to be going around these days." Jake kept his voice neutral, but Diesel caught the edge underneath. "You talking about last night?" Jake glanced around, making sure they were alone. "You see Carlos's face when Viper laid out the new terms? Man's barely keeping his head above water as it is." Diesel took a long sip of coffee, choosing his words carefully. "Club business is club business, brother. Not our place to question the president's decisions, even when those decisions go against everything we swore to stand for." Thunder shifted restlessly beside them, picking up on the tension. The Mustang's ears swiveled between the two men, alert to the undercurrents of their conversation. "Careful, Jake." Diesel's warning carried the weight of genuine concern. "Walls have ears, even out here. Viper's got people watching, listening. He knows some of us aren't happy with the direction things are heading. Then why don't we do something about it? Because he's got too much dirt on too many people. You think those protection runs are random? Viper's building a network, collecting favors and leverage. Anyone who steps out of line." Diesel didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake felt Thunder's breath warm against his palm as the horse moved closer, a gesture that somehow steadied his resolve. The Mustang had survived being broken down, abandoned, written off as worthless, but underneath that neglect had been something unbreakable. "What if someone had evidence?" Jake asked quietly. "Real evidence of what he's doing." Diesel's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. That someone would need to be very careful and very sure about who they could trust. He met Jake's eyes directly. They'd also need backup when the time came to move. The rumble of more bikes starting up echoed from the clubhouse. Soon the compound would be fully awake, and this conversation would become impossible. "I should get going." Diesel turned to leave, then paused. "That horse of yours. Heard tell Mustangs are survivors. Smart, too. They know when to run and when to fight." He looked back at Jake meaningfully. Might be something to learn from that. As Diesel disappeared into the morning shadows, Jake turned back to Thunder. The Mustang stood perfectly still, ears pricked forward as if listening to something only he could hear. In that moment, Jake realized his wild horse might be the most honest thing left in his increasingly corrupt world. The abandoned quarry stretched out like a moonlit crater, its limestone walls carved deep into the earth by decades of machinery that had long since fallen silent. Jake guided Thunder down the narrow trail that wound between towering piles of crushed rock, their shadows dancing in the pale light. The Mustang's hooves found purchase on the uneven ground with an almost supernatural grace, as if the horse could see every stone and crevice in perfect detail. They'd been riding hard for 3 hours since leaving the ranch, pushing deeper into territory that most people avoided after dark. Jake's ribs still ached from Viper's beating, but the steady rhythm of Thunder's gait had worked its way into his bones, easing the pain with each mile they covered. The horse seemed to understand the urgency of their mission, his ears constantly swiveling to catch sounds that human senses would miss entirely. At the bottom of the quarry, Jake dismounted and led Thunder to a hidden cave he'd discovered years ago during a particularly brutal initiation run. The opening was concealed behind a curtain of dead vines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, the cave opened into a natural chamber large enough to shelter both man and horse, with a spring that bubbled up from some underground source. Thunder drank deeply while Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through the photos he'd taken of Viper's ledger. The numbers told a story that would make the DEA salivate. Shipment dates, quantities, distribution routes, and, most damning of all, a list of law enforcement officials who were clearly on Viper's payroll. Sheriff Morrison's name appeared 17 times, along with amounts that dwarfed his official salary. But Jake knew the evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Viper had survived in his position for over a decade by being paranoid and ruthless in equal measure. He would have contingency plans, escape routes, and enough firepower to turn any direct confrontation into a bloodbath. What Jake needed was leverage, something that would force Viper into making a mistake. Thunder nudged Jake's shoulder with his muzzle, and for a moment the two of them stood in perfect stillness, breathing the cool air that flowed through hidden passages in the rock. There was something almost mystical about the connection he felt with this horse, as if Thunder could see into the darkest corners of his soul and found them worthy despite everything Jake had done in service to the angels. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria, heard about the warehouse. "Are you okay?" Jake stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Safe for now. Stay away from the club." The response came immediately. "I know you think you have to do this alone, but you don't. Some battles can't be fought with bandages and kind words, and some can't be won with violence and pride. Trust works both ways, Jake." He almost smiled at that. Maria had always been able to cut through his bullshit with surgical precision, but this wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival, and about making sure that Viper's poison didn't spread any further than it already had. Too many good people had already paid the price for Jake's loyalty to the wrong cause. Thunder whickered softly, his attention focused on the cave entrance. A moment later, Jake heard it too, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines echoing off the quarry walls. Viper's hunting party had found their trail faster than expected. Jake quickly gathered his gear and swung up onto Thunder's back. The Mustang needed no urging to move deeper into the cave system, following passages that seemed to twist and branch in impossible directions. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder, accompanied by the harsh beam of flashlights probing the darkness. "Find that son of a bitch!" Viper's voice bounced off the limestone, distorted but unmistakably furious. "He's got nowhere to run!" Thunder navigated the underground maze with the confidence of an animal that had spent generations learning to survive in hostile territory. They emerged from a different entrance half a mile away, the quarry spread out below them like a tactical map. Jake could see at least 8 motorcycles positioned around the main entrance, their riders methodically searching every hiding place they could find. From his elevated position, Jake pulled out a pair of binoculars and studied the scene below. Viper stood near his custom Harley, barking orders at his enforcers while constantly checking his phone. The chapter president was clearly feeling the pressure. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by the frantic energy of a man who knew his empire was crumbling. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device he'd taken from Viper's office, along with the ledger, a GPS tracker that the president used to monitor high-value shipments. According to the display, there was a major delivery scheduled for tomorrow night at the old textile mill outside town. If Jake could intercept that shipment and turn it over to the right authorities, it would give him the kind of leverage he needed to bring Viper down permanently. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned quarry as Jake led Thunder down the rocky path. 3 weeks had passed since their first ride together, and the stallion had transformed before his eyes. The wild fury was still there, burning beneath the surface, but it was controlled now, focused. Like Jake himself was learning to be. Thunder's ears swiveled forward as they reached the bottom of the quarry. Jake had chosen this place carefully, far enough from prying eyes, isolated enough that no one would stumble across their training sessions. He'd told the club he was working construction jobs in the next county over, picking up extra cash. Marcus had barely looked up from his poker hand when Jake mentioned it. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, feeling the stallion's muscles tense beneath the saddle. Even after weeks together, Thunder could sense Jake's anxiety, and today it was running high. Tonight was the warehouse pickup, and Jake still didn't have enough evidence to bring Marcus down. He needed more than suspicions and overheard conversations. Jake swung into the saddle, and immediately Thunder began to dance sideways, head high and alert. The horse had an uncanny ability to read situations, as if he could smell danger before it materialized. It was a trait that had probably kept him alive in the wild, and Jake was beginning to trust it more than his own instincts. They started with simple maneuvers: walk, trot, stop, turn. But as the morning wore on, Jake pushed them both harder. He'd been studying old cavalry training manuals he'd found online, learning techniques that most people had forgotten. If Thunder truly was descended from military bloodlines, maybe some of that training was still buried in his genetic memory. "All right, let's try something new," Jake said, guiding Thunder toward a series of obstacles he'd constructed from quarry debris. Old tires, wooden planks, concrete blocks, anything that might simulate the chaos of a real confrontation. Thunder approached the first obstacle, a low wooden barrier with ears pinned back. Jake felt the stallion's reluctance and applied gentle pressure with his legs. "Come on, we've got to trust each other." The horse gathered himself and sailed over the barrier with room to spare. Jake felt a surge of exhilaration as they landed smoothly and immediately approached the next obstacle. This time, Thunder didn't hesitate. They worked through the course twice more, each run smoother than the last. Thunder seemed to understand that this was more than just exercise. This was preparation for war. The stallion's intelligence continued to amaze Jake. Sometimes he swore the horse could read his thoughts. As they cooled down, walking slowly around the quarry's perimeter, Jake's phone buzzed. Text from Diesel: "Meeting moved up. Warehouse at 6. Be there." Jake's blood chilled. The original plan had been for a 10 p.m. pickup, under cover of darkness. Moving it to 6 p.m. meant something had changed, something that made Marcus nervous. Jake checked his watch. 2:30 p.m. He had 3.5 hours. Thunder snorted and shook his head, as if sensing Jake's sudden tension. Jake leaned forward, stroking the stallion's neck. "What do you think, boy? Ready for the real thing?" The drive back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Jake's mind raced through scenarios, trying to anticipate what might go wrong. He'd rigged a small camera in his vest, hoping to capture enough evidence to convince the authorities. But cameras could malfunction, and dead men couldn't testify. Back at the stable, Jake groomed Thunder methodically, using the routine to calm his own nerves. The stallion stood patiently, but Jake could feel coiled energy in every muscle. Thunder knew something was coming. "Listen to me," Jake said quietly as he worked. "I might not make it back tonight, but if I don't, old Pete will take care of you. He's good people." Thunder turned his massive head to look at Jake directly, those dark eyes holding an intelligence that was almost human. The stallion nickered softly, a sound Jake had learned meant understanding, acceptance. At 5 p.m., Jake climbed onto his Harley and kicked it to life. The familiar rumble of the engine did nothing to settle his nerves this time. As he pulled away from the ranch, he glanced back to see Thunder standing at the fence line, watching him go. The warehouse sat in an industrial section on the wrong side of town, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings, perfect for the kind of business Marcus conducted. Jake arrived to find 4 other bikes already there: Marcus, Diesel, Tommy, and surprisingly, Snake Henderson from the Mother Charter. Whatever was going down tonight was bigger than Jake had anticipated. He parked his bike and walked toward the warehouse entrance, every sense on high alert. Through the grimy windows, he could see figures moving around inside. The camera in his vest felt heavier than it should, a reminder of the line he was about to cross. Jake took a deep breath and stepped through the door, not knowing if he'd live to see Thunder again. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and old concrete, but underneath lay something else: fear. Jake could sense it the moment he walked through the rusted door, Thunder's reins loose in his calloused hand. The horse's nostrils flared, catching scents Jake's human nose couldn't detect. "You sure about this, brother?" Diesel whispered, adjusting his cut nervously. The big man had been solid since Jake shared what he'd discovered about Viper's operation, but walking into the belly of the beast still made everyone jumpy. Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows between the stacked crates. Rodriguez said the books are here. Everything Viper's been skimming, all the deals with the cartel. It's all documented in that office upstairs. Thunder pawed the concrete floor, his steel shoes striking sparks. The Mustang had grown restless as they'd approached the warehouse district, as if he could sense the corruption that festered in these abandoned buildings. Jake had learned to trust the horse's instincts more than his own. Movement, 2 o'clock. Razor's voice crackled through the radio clipped to Jake's belt. The prospect was positioned on a rooftop across the street, playing lookout with a pair of military-grade binoculars Jake had acquired through less-than-legal channels. Jake pulled Thunder behind a stack of shipping containers, Diesel following close behind. Through the gaps between the boxes, they could see 3 figures moving through the warehouse floor. Even in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, Jake recognized the swagger of Viper's inner circle, Tombstone, Wrecker, and Snake Eyes, the president's most loyal enforcers. "Thought you said this place would be empty," Diesel muttered, checking his. 45. "Should be. Viper's supposed to be at the clubhouse for the next 2 hours. Jake's jaw tightened. Had someone tipped off the president? The paranoia that came with life in an outlaw motorcycle club never fully left, but lately it had been eating at Jake like acid. Thunder's ears pricked forward, and he let out a low snort. The horse had been trying to tell him something all morning, nudging him toward his saddlebags, pawing at the ground whenever they stopped. Jake had dismissed it as excess energy, but now he wondered if the Mustang's wild instincts were picking up on danger. His domesticated human senses missed. "We abort?" Diesel asked, but Jake was already shaking his head. "Can't Rodriguez risked everything getting us this location. If we don't grab those ledgers tonight, Viper moves them tomorrow." The dirty cop had been clear about the timeline. After the close call at the meth lab, Viper was cleaning house, moving evidence, eliminating loose ends. Jake studied the layout, his tactical mind, honed by years of enforcing for the club, calculating angles and options. The office Rodriguez had identified sat at the top of a metal staircase, its windows dark. But getting there meant crossing 30 yards of open floor while Viper's men prowled below. Create a distraction, Jake decided. Something to draw them outside. What kind of distraction? Jake looked at Thunder, remembering the night the Mustang had charged straight through Viper's men at the compound. The horse seemed to understand the violence that surrounded Jake's world, accepting it as naturally as he'd once accepted predators on the open range. The kind that'll make them think someone's trying to break in from the east side. Jake pulled out his phone, scrolling to Razor's number. "Tell him to start his bike and rev it loud, then kill the engine fast. Make it sound like someone's approaching and trying to hide it." Diesel grinned, catching on. "While they investigate, we go up the back stairs." The plan worked better than Jake had dared hope. Razor's Harley roared to life in the distance, then cut out abruptly. Through the warehouse, Jake heard Tombstone curse and bark orders. All 3 men moved toward the east wall, weapons drawn. Jake and Diesel sprinted across the open floor, Thunder's hooves muffled by strips of leather Jake had wrapped around them. They reached the staircase without being spotted, but as Jake's boot hit the first step, the metal groaned loud enough to wake the dead. "What the hell was that?" Snake Eyes' voice echoed through the warehouse. "Go! Go! Go!" Jake hissed, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Thunder bounded up behind him, the Mustang's mountain-bred agility evident in every stride. Diesel brought up the rear, his bulk making the entire staircase shudder. They reached the office door just as flashlight beams began sweeping the staircase below. Jake tried the handle, locked naturally. Diesel moved to kick it in, but Thunder shouldered past both men and reared up, bringing his front hooves down on the door with devastating force. The wood splintered like kindling. Inside the cramped office, filing cabinets lined the walls, and a desk buried under paperwork dominated the center. Jake went straight for the safe Rodriguez had mentioned, while Diesel grabbed armfuls of ledgers from the open files. Jake Diesel's voice was tight. "You need to see this." The big man held up a manila folder marked with Jake's own name. Inside were photographs, Jake with Thunder, Jake talking to Rodriguez, Jake at Sarah's apartment. Viper knew everything. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and fear. Jake sat tied to a rusted chair in the center of the concrete floor, blood trickling from a split lip where Crusher's fist had connected an hour earlier. The dim overhead bulbs cast harsh shadows across the faces of the three men surrounding him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, brother," Viper said, circling behind the chair. His voice carried that familiar mix of disappointment and menace that had intimidated countless prospects over the years. "Just tell us where you stashed the files." Jake spat blood onto the floor. "What files? You paranoid bastards are seeing ghosts." Crusher stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. The man was built like a refrigerator with anger management issues. "Boss, let me work on him some more. He'll sing." "Patience," Viper said, though his tone suggested his own patience was wearing thin. "Jake's always been stubborn. Remember when he took that beating from the Iron Wolves rather than give up our supply routes? Course, that was back when he had loyalty." The warehouse door creaked open, and Mickey Torres walked in, his lawyer shoes clicking against the concrete. The sight of him confirmed Jake's worst suspicions. The chapter's financial advisor wasn't just cooking books, he was orchestrating the whole operation. "Any progress?" Torres asked, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. "He's holding out," Viper replied. "But everyone breaks eventually." Torres checked his watch. "We don't have eventually. The shipment arrives tomorrow night, and if those documents surface before then, we're all looking at federal time." Jake kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. What shipment? The drug operation was bigger than he'd imagined, and these files, whatever they contained, were apparently worth killing for. Outside, a sound drifted through the night air. Faint at first, then growing stronger. Hoofbeats. What the hell? Crusher moved toward the window. The sound grew closer, accompanied by something else, the rumble of motorcycle engines, multiple bikes approaching fast. Viper's hand moved to the pistol tucked in his waistband. "Torres, I thought you said this place was secure." "It is. Nobody knows about—" The warehouse's main door exploded inward as Storm burst through, his massive frame silhouetted against the night. The Mustang's eyes blazed with primal fury, and on his back sat Sarah, gripping a sawed-off shotgun with both hands. "Nobody move!" she shouted. Chaos erupted. Crusher dove for cover behind a stack of oil drums, while Viper drew his weapon. Torres scrambled toward a side exit, but his path was blocked as three more motorcycles roared into the warehouse, Diesel, Wrench, and surprisingly, Old Pete, their faces grim behind their helmets. Storm reared up, striking out with his front hooves as Viper tried to get a clear shot. The horse's presence filled the space with raw, untamed power that seemed to drain the confidence from Jake's captors. "Cut him loose," Sarah commanded, keeping her shotgun trained on Viper while Storm danced sideways, creating a moving barrier. Diesel dismounted and approached Jake's chair, pulling out a knife. "When Sarah told us what was happening, we knew we had to choose sides," he said, soaring through the ropes. "Some of us still remember what the club used to stand for." Viper's face twisted with rage. "You're all dead men. The chapter will hunt you down like dogs." "What chapter?" Old Pete called out, his voice carrying decades of authority. "Half the boys are already asking questions about the missing money. The other half will be real interested to hear about your side business with the cartels." Jake rubbed circulation back into his wrists, his eyes never leaving Viper. "It's over, brother. Whatever you and Torres have been running, it ends tonight." "You don't know what you're talking about," Viper snarled, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Storm snorted and pawed the ground, as if sensing the tension building to a breaking point. The Mustang's presence had transformed the warehouse into something primal, where civilized pretenses fell away and only raw truth remained. Torres made a break for the side door, but Wrench was already there, blocking his path with 200 pounds of muscle and bad intentions. "Going somewhere, number cruncher?" "This is a misunderstanding," Torres stammered. "I can explain everything." "Save it for the feds," Jake said, standing slowly. His body ached from the beating, but adrenaline kept him moving. Because that's who's getting those files. Every last page. Viper's gun hand trembled slightly. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and facing the collapse of everything he'd built through fear and corruption. Storm stepped closer to Jake, the Mustang's massive head lowering to nuzzle his shoulder. In that moment, Jake felt the full weight of their bond. Not just man and horse, but two wild spirits who refused to be broken. "Your move, Viper," Jake said quietly. The warehouse fell silent, except for the sound of Storm's breathing and the distant rumble of more motorcycles approaching in the night. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust as Marcus checked his watch for the third time. 3 hours past midnight, and still no sign of Viper's crew returning from their Phoenix run. The silence should have been comforting, but it gnawed at him like a splinter under skin. Thunder stood motionless beside him, ears pricked forward, reading something in the darkness that Marcus couldn't see. The Mustang had been restless all evening, pacing the corral until Marcus finally saddled him and rode out to the ridge overlooking the compound. Sometimes the horse's instincts were better than any early warning system the club had ever rigged. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered, running his hand along Thunder's neck. The horse's muscles were coiled tight, ready for whatever was coming. A low rumble echoed across the valley. Motorcycles, still miles out but getting closer. Marcus counted the engines by sound, a skill every patchholder learned early. 5 bikes had left for Phoenix. Only 3 were coming back. Thunder snorted and shifted beneath him, and Marcus felt his own tension spike. The horse had never been wrong about danger, not once since they'd started riding together. If Thunder was worried, there was damn good reason. The headlights appeared first, 3 yellow eyes cutting through the darkness as the bikes wound up the mountain road. Marcus urged Thunder back into the shadows of the rocks, watching as the motorcycles pulled into the compound below. Even from this distance, he could see something was off. The riders moved with the jerky urgency of men who'd seen too much trouble. Viper's distinctive Harley wasn't among them. Marcus guided Thunder down a game trail that would bring them to the back of the clubhouse unseen. The horse picked his way through the rocky terrain with the sure-footedness of his wild ancestors, making no sound except for the whisper of hooves on stone. They reached the rear of the building just as angry voices erupted from inside. Marcus dismounted and pressed himself against the wall, listening through a cracked window. "Whole thing was a setup," Snake's voice, higher than usual with adrenaline and fear. "DA was waiting for us like they had a goddamn invitation. What about Viper and Jax?" That was Diesel, the prospect who'd been trying to earn his patch for 2 years. "Gone, man. Viper took 3 rounds before we could even get turned around. Jax went down trying to cover us." Snake's voice cracked. "Somebody tipped them off. Somebody in this club is talking to the feds." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. The Phoenix connection had been Viper's baby, his attempt to expand their territory and prove he could run operations as well as Bulldog. But Viper was smart, careful. He wouldn't have walked into an ambush unless someone had sold him out. Thunder nickered softly behind him, and Marcus turned to see the horse's ears swiveling toward the road. More engines, these ones different, heavier, official. "Shit," Marcus breathed, recognizing the sound of government vehicles. The feds weren't content to take down Viper's crew, they were coming for the whole chapter. He swung back into the saddle as the first black SUV crested the hill, followed by 2 more, federal agents, moving fast and quiet with their lights off. In minutes, they'd have the compound surrounded. Thunder needed no urging. The Mustang wheeled away from the building and bolted for the high country, carrying Marcus up a steep trail that no vehicle could follow. Behind them, the night exploded with searchlights and shouted commands as the raid began. They rode hard for 20 minutes before Marcus finally pulled Thunder to a stop on a narrow ledge halfway up the mountain. Below, the compound blazed with artificial light as federal agents swarmed through every building. He could see his brothers being led away in handcuffs, their cuts stripped from their backs. Everything he'd worked for, fought for, bled for, gone in one night. But as he watched the destruction of his chapter, Marcus felt something unexpected: relief. The corrupt empire Bulldog had built was finally crumbling. The question was whether Marcus would be buried in the rubble or emerge from the ashes with enough evidence to finish what the feds had started. Thunder stamped impatiently, steam rising from his coat in the cold mountain air. The horse knew they couldn't stay here long. The feds would expand their search grid, and even Thunder couldn't outrun helicopters and thermal imaging forever. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he'd memorized but never called. Agent Sarah Chen, the DEA contact who'd been trying to flip him for months. He'd always refused her offers, stayed loyal to his brothers. But his brothers had just proved that loyalty was a one-way street. "Time to change the game," he murmured to Thunder, and pressed send. The call connected on the second ring. "Chen here. It's Marcus Webb. We need to talk." The abandoned mining camp sat like a graveyard of broken dreams in the Nevada desert, its weathered buildings casting jagged shadows in the pre-dawn light. Marcus crouched behind a rusted water tank, watching the compound through binoculars as Viper's men moved between the structures like ants, serving their queen. He'd been observing for 3 hours, memorizing patrol patterns and counting weapons. Thunder stood motionless beside him, the stallion's dark coat blending seamlessly with the shadows. The horse had led them here through treacherous mountain passes that would have claimed any other rider, navigating trails that existed more in legend than on any map. Marcus still couldn't fully comprehend how the animal seemed to know exactly where Viper had taken Elena, but he'd stopped questioning the Mustang's supernatural instincts. A distant rumble made Marcus lower his binoculars. Dust clouds on the horizon announced the arrival of more vehicles, reinforcements that would make his already impossible mission even deadlier. He had maybe 20 minutes before the camp's security doubled. "Just you and me, boy," Marcus whispered, running his hand along Thunder's neck. The horse turned its head, fixing him with those ancient eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations. In that gaze, Marcus saw not just an animal, but a partner who understood the stakes better than any human ever could. Marcus swung into the saddle, feeling the familiar surge of power as Thunder's muscles coiled beneath him. They'd become something more than rider and mount over these past weeks. They were two halves of the same weapon, forged by desperation and tempered by an unbreakable bond. Thunder launched forward without a sound, his hooves finding purchase on loose shale that should have sent them tumbling into the canyon below. They descended the ridge like a shadow-given substance, moving with a fluid grace that defied the laws of physics. Marcus felt the desert wind whip through his hair as they approached the camp's perimeter at a dead gallop. The first sentry never saw them coming. Marcus leaned low in the saddle as Thunder vaulted a collapsed fence, and his boot caught the guard in the temple with surgical precision. The man dropped without a cry, his rifle clattering harmlessly onto the rocky ground. They moved through the outer buildings like ghosts, Thunder's hooves muffled by years of desert sand. Marcus could hear voices ahead, Viper's distinctive growl carrying across the still air as he barked orders at his men. The sound made Marcus's blood burn with fury, but he forced himself to remain calm. Emotion would get Elena killed. A guard emerged from behind a supply shed, assault rifle already rising. Thunder pivoted on his hind legs with impossible speed, his iron-shod hooves catching the weapon and sending it spinning away. Marcus drove his elbow into the man's solar plexus, dropping him to the dirt before he could shout a warning. They reached the main building, a reinforced concrete structure that had once housed mining equipment but now served as Viper's fortress. Marcus could see Elena through a grimy window, tied to a chair in what looked like an old office. Viper paced before her like a caged predator, his scarred face twisted with rage as he gestured wildly. Thunder snorted softly, ears flicking toward the approaching dust clouds. Time was running out. Marcus dismounted and pressed his face to the window, straining to hear Viper's words. "Should have known better than to trust that broken-down cowboy," Viper was saying, his voice thick with venom. "But don't worry, sweetheart. When Marcus comes for you, and he will come, I'll make sure he watches you die before I put a bullet in his head." Elena's response was lost in the wind, but Marcus could see the defiance in her posture, even bound to that chair. She wasn't broken, wasn't begging. The sight of her strength gave him the final push he needed. He remounted Thunder and guided the stallion around to the building's rear entrance. The door hung open, probably to create a cross-breeze in the stifling desert heat. It would also serve as their way in. Thunder's ears swiveled forward, and Marcus felt the horse's muscles tense. The stallion had caught something, a sound or scent that Marcus's human senses couldn't detect. Whatever it was, it spelled danger. Marcus drew his .45 and checked the cylinder one final time. 6 shots against at least a dozen armed men, under normal circumstances. It would be suicide. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Thunder wasn't a normal horse. The rumbling of engines grew louder as Viper's reinforcements closed the distance to the camp. Marcus nudged Thunder forward, and they approached the open doorway like death itself seeking an appointment. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether Elena lived or died, whether Viper's reign of terror continued, and whether the bond between a broken man and a legendary Mustang was truly strong enough to overcome impossible odds. The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 3 in the morning, shadows pooling between rusted buildings like spilled oil. Jake guided Thunder through the maze of loading docks and abandoned trucks, every hoofbeat echoing off concrete walls. The Mustang's ears swiveled constantly, picking up sounds Jake's human senses couldn't detect. They'd been moving for 2 hours since leaving the safe house, taking a route that avoided main roads and security cameras. Tank's intelligence had been solid. The warehouse where Viper stored his off-books inventory sat isolated at the end of a dead-end street, perfect for illegal operations, but equally perfect for what Jake had planned. Thunder stopped without warning, head raised high. Jake felt the stallion's muscles tense beneath him, every fiber alert. Then he heard it too, the low rumble of motorcycle engines in the distance, getting closer. "Easy, boy," Jake whispered, sliding from the saddle. He led Thunder behind a cluster of shipping containers, pressing himself against the cold metal. The sound grew louder, then split into multiple engines, at least 4 bikes, maybe 5. Jake checked his phone. No messages from Marcus or Tank. This wasn't part of the plan. The motorcycles rounded the corner, headlights cutting through the darkness. Jake recognized the lead bike immediately, Viper's custom Harley with its distinctive flame paint job. Behind him rode 4 other angels, including Diesel and Crow, 2 of Viper's most trusted enforcers. They pulled up to the warehouse entrance, engines dying one by one. In the sudden silence, Jake could hear their voices carrying on the night air. "Told you someone was asking questions," Diesel was saying. "Tank's been acting strange lately." "Tank's always been strange," Viper replied, his voice cold. "Question is whether he's stupid enough to cross me." Jake's blood ran cold. Had Tank been compromised? Was this whole thing a setup? Viper continued, "We check the inventory, make sure nothing's been touched. If someone's trying to play games with me, they're about to learn why that's a mistake." The group moved toward the warehouse entrance. Jake watched Viper produce a set of keys, unlocking multiple deadbolts. They disappeared inside, and moments later, lights flickered on behind grimy windows. Jake pulled out his phone, fingers hovering over Marcus's number. But what could he say? That the plan had gone sideways before it even started? That they'd walked into a trap? Thunder nudged him with his muzzle, those intelligent eyes reflecting the distant light. The horse had been through hell and back, had trusted Jake when trust meant survival. Now it was Jake's turn to show that same faith. He scrolled through his contacts and sent a brief message to Marcus. Complications. Stay back until you hear from me. Then he turned off the phone. The warehouse had multiple entrances. Jake had studied the building plans Tank provided. If those were still accurate, there was a loading dock on the south side that connected to the main floor through a maze of storage rooms. It would put him inside, but not where Viper and his crew were conducting their inventory. Jake secured Thunder's reins to a pipe protruding from the container, making sure the Mustang could break free if necessary. The horse watched him with what looked like understanding, perhaps even approval. "Wait for my signal, boy. When things go bad, and they will, we're going to remind these bastards why Mustangs run free." Moving through the shadows, Jake circled the warehouse perimeter. The south loading dock was exactly where the plans indicated, and the door stood slightly ajar, either careless security or another trap. Jake paused, listening. No sounds from this section of the building. He slipped inside. The warehouse interior was a maze of crates and shelving units, most empty but some clearly containing the contraband Viper used to fund his empire. Jake moved carefully, using the shadows between storage racks to mask his approach. Voices echoed from the main area, growing clearer as he got closer. He crept to the edge of the storage section and peered around a corner. Viper and his crew stood in a cleared area near several opened crates. Even from a distance, Jake could see military-grade weapons, bundles of cash, and plastic-wrapped packages that could only be drugs. Enough evidence to put Viper away for life, if Jake could somehow document it and live long enough to deliver that evidence to the FBI. "Everything's here," Crow reported, checking items against a clipboard. "If someone's been nosing around, they haven't taken anything." "That's not the point," Viper snapped. "The point is, someone thinks they can investigate me. Someone thinks they can—" A phone rang, cutting him off. Viper answered, his face darkening as he listened. "When?" he barked. "How long ago?" A pause. Find him now." He ended the call and turned to his crew. "Tank's missing. His apartment's been tossed. Looks like he left in a hurry. Someone got to him." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. The plan was completely blown, and he was trapped in a warehouse with 5 killers who now knew they had a traitor in their ranks. Outside, Thunder's whinny pierced the night. Not a sound of distress, but a battle cry. The compound felt different when Marcus returned with Thunder at dawn. Word had spread overnight about the confrontation at the old barn, and he could see it in the way prospects averted their eyes and patched members whispered in tight clusters. The Mustang's hooves rang against the asphalt like hammer strikes on an anvil, each step announcing their presence. Razor's bike sat parked in its usual spot near the clubhouse entrance, chrome gleaming despite the early hour. Marcus had expected him to be awake, probably coordinating damage control or planning retaliation. What he hadn't expected was the silence that greeted them as they approached the stables. Thunder's ears flicked forward, muscles tensing beneath the saddle. The horse sensed danger before Marcus spotted the 3 figures emerging from the shadows between buildings. Bone and 2 prospects he didn't recognize, all carrying tire irons and moving with the deliberate pace of men who'd been given orders. "Razor wants to see you," Bone called out, his voice carrying across the empty lot. "Says you got some explaining to do about last night." Marcus remained mounted, one hand resting on Thunder's neck. The Mustang's breathing had shifted, becoming deeper and more controlled. It was the same change Marcus had noticed before every confrontation they'd faced together, the horse preparing for battle. "Tell him I'll be along," Marcus replied. "Soon as I get Thunder settled." Bone laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the building walls. "See, that's where you got it wrong," Razor says now. "And he says the horse stays outside." The prospects flanked out, trying to create a triangle formation that would box them in. Basic intimidation tactics that worked on most people. But Thunder wasn't most animals, and Marcus had learned to trust the Mustang's instincts completely. Thunder pawed the ground once, a seemingly casual gesture that positioned his body at an angle to the 3 men. Marcus felt the horse's muscles coiling like springs beneath him. "You boys really want to do this?" Marcus asked, his voice conversational. "Because last night didn't go so well for your side." "Last night was just the warm-up," one of the prospects said, raising his tire iron. "Boss says you've forgotten what loyalty means." The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Loyalty. He'd given Razor 15 years of unquestioning service, had done things that still haunted his sleep, all in the name of club loyalty. And now these kids, these wannabes who'd never earned their place through anything but corruption and fear, were lecturing him about it. Thunder must have felt the anger surge through him because the horse moved without any signal from Marcus. One moment they were stationary, the next Thunder was charging forward with explosive power. The prospect with the tire iron barely had time to widen his eyes before Thunder's shoulder caught him in the chest, sending him flying backward into a parked Harley. Bone swung his weapon in a wide arc, aiming for Thunder's legs, but the Mustang spun with impossible agility for an animal his size. Marcus leaned low in the saddle, grabbing Bone's wrist as they passed and using Thunder's momentum to wrench the tire iron away. The enforcer stumbled, cursing, as Marcus wheeled Thunder around to face the remaining prospect. The kid took one look at the Mustang's wild eyes and Marcus's grim expression and dropped his weapon, backing away with his hands raised. "Smart choice," Marcus said, dismounting in one fluid motion. He kept Thunder's reins in his left hand while advancing on Bone, who was struggling to his feet. "Now here's what you're going to tell Razor. Tell him I'll meet with him, but it'll be on neutral ground. The old truck stop on Highway 9 tonight at midnight." Bone spat blood, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You think you're calling the shots now? You and that damn horse?" Marcus looked at Thunder, seeing something in the Mustang's eyes that went beyond animal intelligence. There was understanding there, and purpose, as if the horse grasped exactly what they were fighting for. The realization settled over Marcus like armor. They weren't just partners anymore. They were something new, something Razor and his corrupt machine couldn't comprehend or control. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I think we are." The prospect who'd been knocked into the motorcycle groaned and rolled over, clutching his ribs. Bone helped him to his feet, never taking his eyes off Thunder. "This ain't over," Bone said. "No," Marcus agreed, swinging back into the saddle. "It's just getting started." As they rode away from the compound, Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling over him. There would be no going back after tonight. Whatever happened at that truck stop would determine whether the Diablos remained Razor's personal criminal empire or returned to what they'd once been, a brotherhood built on respect rather than fear. Thunder's stride lengthened as they hit the open road, carrying them toward whatever came next. The warehouse district looked like a graveyard of rusted dreams under the pale morning light. Jake pulled his Harley behind a gutted factory building, the engine's rumble echoing off broken windows and crumbling brick. Thunder stood tied to a trailer 50 yards away, muscles rippling beneath his midnight coat as he sensed the tension in the air. The Mustang's eyes tracked every shadow, every movement, as if he understood that everything they'd worked toward culminated here. Marcus emerged from behind a concrete pillar, his weathered face grim. Viper's inside with 8 prospects, got the FBI's wire gear and enough firepower to level this place. He handed Jake a small transmitter. "Agent Torres is positioned 3 blocks out with backup. Soon as we get Viper talking about the cartel money and Doc's murder, they move in." Jake clipped the device inside his vest, the weight of it feeling heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. "What about the others? Razor, Tank, the guys who aren't dirty?" "They're being handled. Torres made sure they got called away on bogus runs. It's just Viper's inner circle now." Marcus gripped his shoulder. "You sure about this, brother? Once we walk in there, there's no going back." Through the warehouse's grimy windows, Jake could see movement inside. Viper had chosen this place for a reason, isolated, defensible, perfect for eliminating loose ends, which is exactly what Jake had become the moment he started digging into Doc's death. "I'm sure." Jake checked his 45, then looked back at Thunder. The Mustang stood perfectly still, but those intelligent eyes held a promise. When the time came, he'd be ready. The warehouse floor stretched out like an arena, empty except for a circle of motorcycles arranged around the center where Viper waited. The chapter president sat astride his custom chopper, arms crossed, flanked by prospects Jake barely recognized, young, hungry faces that would do anything to earn their patches. Perfect soldiers for Viper's dirty war. Well, well, the prodigal enforcer returns. Viper's voice carried across the empty space, thick with mock warmth. "Heard you've been asking questions, Jake, poking around in things that don't concern you." Jake walked forward slowly, hands visible but ready. "Just trying to understand why my brothers are dying, Viper. First Doc, now who knows who's next." Doc was weak. Started developing a conscience about our business arrangements. Viper's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You know how it is in our world. Weakness gets you killed." The transmitter felt warm against Jake's chest. He needed more, needed Viper to connect himself directly to both the murder and the cartel operation. "What kind of business arrangements? We talking about those shipments you've been running through the clubhouse?" Viper laughed, but it held no humor. "You really want to know? Fine. The Juarez cartel pays us $5 million a year to move their product through our territory. Clean money, clean routes, courtesy of your brothers." Doc found out and started making noise about going to the feds. He leaned forward on his handlebars, so I put him down like the rabid dog he was. "Perfect." Jake almost smiled as he felt the weight of Viper's confession settling into the recording device. But his satisfaction died as he noticed the prospects spreading out, surrounding him. "The beautiful thing about you, Jake, is how predictable you are. Always playing the hero, always thinking with your heart instead of your head." Viper stood up on his bike's pegs. "Did you really think I didn't know about your little investigation? About your Fed friends waiting outside?" Ice ran down Jake's spine as Viper pulled out a signal jammer, its red light blinking maliciously. "No cavalry coming, brother. No backup plan. Just you, me, and some unfinished business." The prospects drew their weapons in unison, a deadly flower of steel blooming around Jake. 8 guns trained on him from every angle. Even if he was fast enough to take down 2 or 3, the others would cut him apart. But Viper had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the bond between a desperate man and a legendary horse. Jake whistled, sharp, piercing, carrying across the warehouse like a battle cry. The sound had barely faded when Thunder's answering neigh shook the building's windows. Hoofbeats thundered against concrete, growing louder, closer. "What the hell?" Viper's question cut off as thunder exploded through the warehouse's side door, splinters of wood and metal flying like shrapnel. The Mustang moved like liquid lightning, his hooves striking sparks from the concrete floor. The prospects scattered as half a ton of furious horseflesh charged into their midst. One man screamed as Thunder's shoulder sent him flying into a concrete pillar. Another tried to aim his gun and found himself trampled under iron-hard hooves. Jake rolled behind an overturned oil drum as gunfire erupted, using the chaos to his advantage. Thunder reared up on his hind legs, front hooves flailing, keeping the shooters scattered and their aim wild. The warehouse had become a battlefield, and the legendary Mustang was evening the odds. The warehouse reeked of motor oil and betrayal. Jake kept one hand on Thunder's neck as they crept through the shadows between stacked crates and abandoned motorcycles. The Mustang's breathing was steady, controlled, a warrior's calm before the storm. 6 men inside, Martinez whispered, adjusting his grip on the Remington. "Rico's got 2 more watching the perimeter." Jake nodded, studying the layout through a grimy window. Rico sat behind a metal desk, counting stacks of bills while his lieutenants lounged nearby. The corrupt chapter president looked comfortable, confident. He had no idea his empire was about to crumble. "Remember," Jake murmured to his small crew of loyal brothers, "we need Rico alive. The feds want him breathing." Thunder snorted softly, as if disagreeing with the mercy. The horse had seen what Rico was capable of. The drugs, the violence, the corruption that poisoned everything it touched. But Jake needed justice, not revenge. "On my signal," he said, then pressed his face against Thunder's muzzle. "You ready for this, boy?" The Mustang's dark eyes held an intelligence that still amazed Jake. This wasn't just a horse anymore. It was his partner, his weapon, his salvation, all rolled into one magnificent creature. Jake checked his, 45, one last time, then swung onto Thunder's back. No saddle, no bridle, just man and beast unified by purpose. He'd learned to communicate, with thunder through subtle shifts in weight and touch, a language older than words. The warehouse had two entrances. Jake would take the front with thunder, while Martinez and the others hit the back. Classic pincer movement, but with a twist none of Rico's men would expect. Go. Jake pressed his knees into Thunder's sides, and the Mustang exploded forward. The warehouse door splintered like kindling as 800 pounds of muscle and fury crashed through it. Shouts erupted as Rico's men scrambled for weapons. Thunder reared, hooves flashing in the fluorescent light. One of Rico's lieutenants raised a shotgun, but Jake's .45 barked first. The man spun and dropped, clutching his shoulder. What the hell? Rico dove behind his desk as Thunder wheeled and charged again. The remaining men scattered, their formation broken by the sheer audacity of a mounted assault inside a building. Martinez's team crashed through the rear entrance, adding to the chaos. Gunfire echoed off concrete walls as Jake guided Thunder between the crates, using them for cover while picking his shots carefully. A biker emerged from behind a motorcycle, Mach 10 chattering. Bullets sparked off metal as Jake leaned low, feeling Thunder's powerful stride beneath him. The Mustang cut left without being directed, seeming to sense the threat. Jake's return fire caught the gunman's center mass. "You're finished, Rico," Jake shouted over the noise. "FBI's got your books, your operation, everything." Rico's laugh was bitter, desperate. "You think you're some kind of cowboy, Reeves? This ain't the Old West." Thunder suddenly stopped, ears forward, focused on something Jake couldn't see. The Mustang's nostrils flared, and Jake felt the horse's muscles bunch with tension. The sniper was well hidden in the rafters above, but Thunder had sensed him somehow, maybe caught his scent or heard the faint scrape of metal on metal. Jake rolled sideways off Thunder's back, just as the rifle cracked. The bullet passed through the space where his head had been. Thunder reared again, this time deliberately, his hooves catching a hanging chain and setting it swinging. The motion confused the sniper's second shot, buying Jake precious seconds to spot the muzzle flash and return fire. The sniper tumbled from the rafters with a wet thud. "Last chance, Rico," Martinez called out. "Surrender now or we finish this." The warehouse fell silent except for the groans of wounded men and Thunder's steady breathing. Jake remounted, keeping his pistol trained on Rico's hiding spot. "It's over," Jake said. "Your crew's down. The feds are outside waiting. You can walk out of here and face a judge, or we can do this the hard way." Rico stood slowly, hands raised but eyes burning with hatred. "You destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself the day you started poisoning kids with that synthetic garbage." Thunder stepped forward, hooves clicking on concrete. Rico flinched as the Mustang approached, probably remembering their first violent encounter months ago. "Jake Reeves," Rico spat. "Enforcer turned Boy Scout. You always were weak." Jake smiled grimly. "Maybe. But weakness like mine beats corruption like yours every damn time." The FBI agents flooded in as Martinez zip-tied Rico's wrists. Jake remained mounted, watching his former chapter president get read his rights. Thunder stood perfectly still, but Jake could feel the horse's readiness. One wrong move from Rico, and the Mustang would end this permanently. Justice would have to be enough, for now. As Rico was led away in federal custody, Jake finally allowed himself to breathe. The war was over. The corrupt chapter was finished. But the real fight, rebuilding what had been broken, was just beginning. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Thunder's hooves struck concrete, sparking against the floor like flint on steel. Jake felt the familiar surge of power beneath him as they charged through the stunned crowd of vicious circle members. Patches dove sideways, his cut flapping as he rolled behind a stack of stolen motorcycle parts. "Take them down!" Patches screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Kill them both!" Gunfire exploded around them as Jake guided Thunder in a serpentine pattern between the towering shelves of contraband. The Mustang's instincts were razor-sharp, anticipating every obstacle, every threat. A bullet whined past Jake's ear as Thunder leaped over a low barrier, landing with the grace of a creature born to run wild. Reaper emerged from behind a pillar, his massive frame blocking their path. The enforcer raised a sawed-off shotgun, finger tightening on the trigger. Thunder's eyes flashed with ancient fire, and without warning the horse reared up, striking out with iron-hard hooves. The shot went wide as Reaper stumbled backward, catching a hoof to the shoulder that sent him spinning into a rack of chrome exhaust pipes. "The evidence!" Jake shouted over the din, spotting the metal filing cabinets against the far wall. Inside those drawers lay everything the FBI needed: shipping manifests, payment records, photographs of murdered rivals, all of Patch's sins documented in meticulous detail. Thunder wheeled toward their target, but more gunmen appeared, forming a semicircle of leather and chrome. Jake counted at least 8 members, all drawing weapons. These weren't just thugs, they were killers who'd followed Patches into darkness, and they had nothing left to lose. "You always were too stupid to know when you were beat, Jake," Patches called out, stepping into view with a chrome-plated .45 in his hand. "That nag of yours might be fast, but bullets are faster." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Jake could feel Thunder's muscles coiled beneath him, ready to explode into motion. But even the legendary Mustang couldn't outrun 8 guns at close range. The math was simple and brutal. Then the warehouse doors burst open with a thunderous crash. Federal agents poured through every entrance like a black tide, their tactical gear gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "FBI, nobody move!" the command echoed from a dozen throats as laser sights painted red dots across the chests of every vicious circle member. Agent Martinez appeared at the lead, a weapon trained on Patches. "Marcus Sullivan, you're under arrest for racketeering, murder, and conspiracy." But Patches wasn't finished. His eyes had gone wild, feral with the desperation of a cornered animal. "If I'm going down," he snarled, swinging his gun toward Jake, "I'm taking you with me." Time slowed to a crawl. Jake saw the hammer of the .45 falling, saw the muzzle flash bloom like a deadly flower. He felt Thunder's powerful hindquarters bunch as the horse launched sideways, but the bullet was already flying, cutting through the air with lethal precision. The slug caught Jake in the shoulder, spinning him partially around in the saddle. Pain exploded through his body like liquid fire, but Thunder's momentum carried them forward. The Mustang's fury was a living thing now, ancient and terrible. This was no longer about evidence or justice. Someone had hurt his rider, and that demanded a reckoning. Thunder charged straight at Patches, who was frantically trying to chamber another round. The chapter president's face went white as he realized what was coming. 20 years of corruption and murder had led to this moment, facing down a force of nature that wouldn't be stopped by money or intimidation. Patches raised the gun again, but Thunder was already there. The Mustang's shoulder caught the corrupt president's center mass, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the concrete wall behind him. The sickening crack of breaking bones echoed through the warehouse as Patches crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering away into the shadows. Jake slumped forward in the saddle, his vision blurring from blood loss. But through the haze of pain, he saw federal agents securing the scene, photographing evidence, reading rights to the surviving vicious circle members. It was over. 20 years of Patch's reign of terror had finally come to an end. Thunder stood perfectly still as paramedics approached, the great horse somehow understanding that his rider needed help. Jake felt gentle hands easing him from the saddle, heard voices calling for a stretcher, but his eyes never left Thunder's face. "We did it, boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the controlled chaos around them. "We actually did it." The Mustang's dark eyes held depths of understanding that went beyond mere animal intelligence. They were partners now, bound by something stronger than blood or leather. They were legends in the making, the broken-down enforcer and the wild horse who'd brought down an empire built on fear. As consciousness faded, Jake smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight justice had finally come home. The desert wind carried the sound of approaching Harleys like thunder rolling across the wasteland. Jake's hand found Thunder's neck, feeling the Mustang's muscles coiled and ready beneath sun-warmed hide. 3 years of running, fighting, and surviving had led to this moment, the final confrontation with Reaper and what remained of his corrupted empire. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, watching dust clouds on the horizon grow larger. "We finish this today." Thunder's ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring as he caught familiar scents. The Mustang had led them here, to this ancient riverbed where wild horses had run free for generations. It seemed fitting that their war would end where Thunder's story began. The bikes crested the ridge, 8 of them, their chrome gleaming like weapons in the afternoon sun. Reaper rode point, his massive frame hunched over his custom shovel head, the same bike he'd used to run down Jake's father 15 years ago. Behind him came the last of his loyal enforcers, men who'd chosen greed and violence over the brotherhood they'd once sworn to protect. Jake stepped away from the rocky outcrop where he'd taken cover, letting them see him clearly. Thunder moved beside him, no longer the broken-down Mustang from that auction 3 years ago, but a creature of pure power and defiance. The horse's presence alone seemed to unsettle the approaching riders. The engines died one by one as the bikers formed a rough semicircle. Reaper dismounted slowly, his movements betraying the years of hard living and harder choices. His once powerful frame had gone soft around the edges, but his eyes still held the cold calculation that had made him feared throughout the Southwest. "Thought you might run forever, prospect," Reaper called out, using the dismissive term like a weapon. But even wild things got to come home eventually. Jake's hand moved instinctively to the gun tucked behind his back, then stopped. This wasn't going to end with bullets. It never could have. Too much blood, too much history, too much pain for a quick resolution. "I ain't running anymore," Jake replied, his voice carrying across the silence. "Found what I was looking for." Reaper's laugh was ugly, bitter. "That broken-down nag? Hell, Jake, I always knew you were sentimental, but this is pathetic even for you." Thunder's muscles bunched, and Jake felt the change in the Mustang's posture. The horse had recognized something, a scent, a sound, maybe just the presence of an old enemy. Jake remembered the day he'd bought Thunder, how the horse had seemed to know things, to understand connections that went deeper than training or instinct. "You remember this place, don't you, Reaper?" Jake asked, pieces of an old puzzle finally clicking together. "This is where you found him, isn't it? Where you broke him the first time." The color drained from Reaper's weathered face. Around him, his men shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons they didn't understand they'd need. Thunder stepped forward, his hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls like war drums. The Mustang's eyes were fixed on Reaper now, and something ancient and wild burned there. The memory of freedom stolen, of spirit crushed, of years spent broken and forgotten. "That's impossible," Reaper whispered, but his voice carried the weight of recognition. "I killed that horse. Shot him myself when he wouldn't break completely." "You shot at him," Jake corrected, understanding flooding through him. "But Thunder's harder to kill than you thought. Spent years healing, waiting, and when I found him, he found his purpose." Thunder's scream split the desert air, a sound of pure rage and recognition that sent the bikers' horses shying away from their own mounts. The Mustang charged, not at Reaper but past him, scattering the semicircle of men like pins before a bowling ball. Jake followed, moving with the fluid grace he'd learned from 3 years of riding bareback across impossible terrain. Reaper went for his gun, but Jake was already inside his reach, years of pent-up fury driving his fist into the older man's gut. They went down together in a tangle of leather and denim, rolling across the hard-packed earth. Reaper still had size and dirty tricks, but Jake had something his former president had never possessed, a reason to fight that went beyond greed or power. Thunder wheeled and charged again, driving back the enforcers who tried to intervene. The Mustang moved like liquid violence, teeth and hooves keeping Jake's back clear while the 2 men settled their blood debt in the dust. When it ended, Reaper lay still beneath the desert sky, his empire finally crumbling around him. Jake stood slowly, breathing hard, feeling the weight of 15 years sliding off his shoulders like an abandoned coat. Thunder approached quietly, pressing his great head against Jake's chest. Around them, the surviving bikers were already mounting up, their loyalty dying with their leader. Some fights ended with explosions, others ended with whispers and the sound of engines fading into distance. Jake swung onto Thunder's back one last time, feeling the Mustang's strength beneath him. They had miles to ride before sunset, and for the first time in years, they were riding toward something instead of away from it. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, full of possibilities,